Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone, and welcome to our next FP&A Trends webinar that today we are talking about a new age of zero-based budgeting. My name is Larissa Malnichuk, Managing Director of FP&A Trends Group and International FP&A Board, and I'm here to facilitate this interesting discussion from our very experienced and international panel. Just a quick reminder about today's agenda. So we are going to talk about this incredible evolution of zero-based budgeting from ZBB to zero-based FP&A or to zero-based everything. Also, ZBB is a management system and culture, a new age of zero-based budgeting, and what are the learnings and successes. ZBB technology enablers and how the modern technology really makes it easy for the companies to implement and to manage. Of course, there will be conclusions and recommendations and Q&A session at the end. Now it's a great timing to invite our panelists to switch on their cameras, and I would like to start those introductions. So please, panelists, if you can switch on your cameras, and we are ready. Okay, so let us start from Tom. Tom Vanover-Schelde, Portfolio Finance Director at Capita. He's also a member of our London FP&A board, where he presented on a number of occasions. With a background in internal audit, Tom moved to business and he held a number of senior FP&A positions, and obviously zero-based budgeting, it's one of those experiences that he had. Actually, he implemented the process in Haynes, in the company that actually quite well known in their zero-based budgeting experience. And Tom even had this title, Zero-Based Budgeting Lead for Russia, India, Middle East, and Africa. Tom's today presentation would be about his practical experience, or namely ZBB as a management system and culture. Tom, welcome to FP&A Trends webinar. Hello. The next presenter is joining us from New York, Dawn Laduc. Dawn is a VP FP&A Global Supply Chain at Natchez Bounty Company. She's also a member of our New York FP&A board, where she presented on a number of occasions. She has more than 20 years of experience at different levels of FP&As. And previously, she worked in the companies like Mondelez, Kraft Foods, Clorox, and Nestlé. Dawn, you're welcome. Welcome to FP&A Trends webinar.
Thank you for having me. Excited to be here.
Thank you so much. And our third panelist also joined us from New York, from the US, Larry Severn, who is a FP&A thought leader and regional director at both International. So Larry is internationally recognized thought leader in the area of corporate performance management and FP&A. He's a founder and former CEO at Xlarent Incorporation, a leading EPM software company. And his book on value planning earned the endorsements of many industry leaders. Larry's work has been profiled in New York Times and at the Harvard Business Review and in many other leading publications. And today, Larry is going to talk about the role of modern technologies in implementation of zero-based budgeting. Larry, you're welcome.
Very happy to be here.
Thank you so much, panelists. And I would invite you to switch off your cameras now. And let me give a very quick introduction of FP&A Trends Group. So my background is CIMA, Chartered Institute of Management Accountants. I'm a former practitioner by myself. I led FP&A departments at different leading organizations. And this is my organization at the moment. And the last 4 or 5 years, it was a lot of travel around the globe, 27 chapters in 16 countries on 4 continents of our international FP&A board. And just recently, we also started to do best practice workshops and consultancy on latest trends and developments in FP&A. Let me remind you just about household items of this webinar. 1 hour webinar, There will be 2 polling questions, and we would like to ask you to participate by voting. There will be interactive Q&A session. Please ask questions, and you can start straight away from the first presentation via the chat box. You can send your questions, and if we have a lot of questions and we are not able to answer, obviously we can do this in offline. We will send you an email after this. A presentation is available right now in your handouts, and we will send you the recording together with presentation again 2 days after the meeting. And also I would like to remind you that if you can participate at the survey at the end of the session in order for us to understand how we can improve our webinar. Before we start, I would like to say thank you so much to our sponsor, Board International, the company that provides flexible FP&A technology and solutions. Thank you so much, Board International. Just a quick introduction from my side before we start to hear practical experience from our panelists. So we had ZBB FP&A meetings in many countries around the globe. And many people ask what it is, you see, and the simple definition is when you forget about the history and you look at your planning and forecasting from zero-based. But in reality, good quality value-adding ZBB, it's not about doing the same things with less resources. In opposite, it's about identifying those activities and key drivers and concentrate on those drivers, expand on those drivers. Those are some conclusions from many meetings around the globe. So what is different in ZBB right now? First of all, it's not applied only to expenses as it's historically been. It's not just a cost-cutting exercise. In reality, I've seen organizations that started to apply it to different lines of P&L, balance sheet, cash flow. And this is one of those methods that actually can help you to identify the key drivers, the new drivers, because you're looking at the things from zero perspective, from new perspective. And of course, this is the way how you can improve your FP&A business partnering, because this is the collective exercise and collective exercise that changed the culture. And of course, modern technology has a huge role to play at the moment, and we will see how. So my quick introduction. Also, many of you ask questions about what is zero-based FP&A. ZBB, zero-based budgeting, it's clear, yeah, but what is ZB FP&A? You can see that many consultancy organizations started to talk about zero-based everything, especially after the pandemic situation. And obviously, zero-based budgeting exercise is 50 years old. It started in 1970. And historically, it's always been about the expenses. But at the moment, especially after the pandemic, after the situation when our historic data sometimes can't explain the future, we are talking about zero-based FP&A. So let us forget about the history sometimes, and let us concentrate on those key drivers, those drivers that probably were hidden, and we can discover them during the zero-based budgeting FP&A activity. I'm happy to introduce our first speaker now, Tom, who is Portfolio Finance Director at Capita, but former lead of zero-based budgeting in Heinz. Tom, you presented those very interesting insights at London FP&A board, and the floor is yours. You're welcome to talk about your experience in ZBB.
Thank you, Larissa. If you can go to the next slide. Hi, everyone. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to share some of my experiences in implementing zero-based budgeting. I'm nowhere near a thought leader as Larry is, but I have the advantage of having implemented it in Kraft Heinz in one of the regions, which is quite an interesting, a very interesting experience. And it taught me a lot about ZBB as a method, but also as a strategy, really. And the way to look at ZBB is not just to read kind of the budgeting word, because that's not really what it is about. If you want to make a really big difference in organizational performance. You need to think of it as a part of a wider management system and really a culture change for the organization. And the key elements of that kind of culture change are really to have a detailed view on cost, and everyone in the organization have that kind of constant awareness of cost. Key to ZBB success will be ambitious targets and a lot of governance and focus on achieving those targets. And the only way to achieve those targets and kind of keep that focus on top of governance is to make it a key metric in your performance system, in your bonus or your variable compensation schemes, which in Heinz was very much a key element. And the last thing is more about consistency. Sometimes you see there's one rule for people deeper in the organization and another rule for execs. And in Heinz at the time, this is a couple of years ago, these rules were implemented pretty evenly across all management layers. Next slide, please. Thank you. So you need to think, if you want to implement zero-based budgeting and have a real impact, there's a couple of items that you need to take into account. I mean, many organizations, and Heinz was similar before ZBB, kind of deal with some of the problems you see there on the left on your screen, where it's very hard to get a good view on costs and the cost drivers behind it, and any possibilities to reduce costs. And the two main kind of key basics you need to establish or achieve is standardization of costs. Group them in standard buckets with common drivers, and you need to do that across the whole organization, or the whole scope of where you implement zero-based budgeting. The typical way to do that is packages and sub-packages, but there's probably other items. And you need to think about your standardized reports. You cannot have different reports and add them up across the globe. You need to have the same way of looking at costs in a standard way. And to be able to achieve this standardization, you need to have visibility. Detailed visibility, and not using Excel spreadsheets. I mean, we tried that in the first year in Heinz, which was absolutely horrible while we were developing a tool. You need to have some kind of a system where you can pull from the ledgers so that your costs really reconciles ultimately to what your P&L is. Next slide, please. So the next thing to think about is how you will kind of set this up organizationally. And an interesting concept in ZBB is that every dollar of spend is actually owned by two people. So normally you would have a marketing director or sales director. They have a budget for the year on expenses. And if they underspend on people, they might overspend on travel or the other way around. And no one cares too much. That's not the case in ZBB, because you would have a package owner that only looks at travel across all the budgets and says, hang on a minute, you can't overspend your travel because then I am off my targets because I only look at travel. And this double accountability on spend drives a bit of organizational conflict, but also a lot of scrutiny, which drives savings inevitably. And that's kind of what you see in the item to the left of your screen, how that works. A couple of other key principles is to really think about who spends money. I mean, Heinz was reduced worldwide. People can raise POs by 80%, I think. So the only few people that can do it know the rules, are trained, and are much more empowered to kind of stop spend when they think it's not right. We changed a lot of workflows. Package owners kind of have to approve spending their package, etc. We had ZBB teams in every business unit, every region headquarters. So there is some additional headcount here, but many people do this on top of their day job. And then in terms of governance, we had ZBB front and center of any governance, and we had a quarterly review with the CEO of the company, a full day, where he basically reviews all the packages region by region, which is good kind of in terms of visibility, but it's fairly challenging because obviously you don't want to go to your CEO and show big overspend for CEO budget in your targets. Next slide, please. So why would you do ZBB? I think the first one is really to get better visibility on costs and cost drivers, which helps with transparency, because I think we all are aware of compliance as well. So if you know where the costs go, that helps a lot. And then obviously to save costs and control costs. And one big benefit of ZBB is that you get to a point where everyone knows a number. and that's quite an asset, I think. In terms of outcomes, I mean, we saw in Kraft Heinz reductions of more than 30%, some packages up to 60% over 2 years. So really big savings, and you can see that impact on profit margins. I mean, you could of course reinvest it as well, but if you look at Kraft Heinz's profit margins versus a lot of their competitors, they're still fairly significantly higher, and ZBB is a big part of that. And of course, you can choose to invest it in marketing, drop to the bottom line, or pay it in variable compensation, however you want. Next slide, please. So some key takeaways. So obviously we only covered kind of the surface, right? So I mean, do reach out on LinkedIn on the questions on more specific items. But if you're thinking about implementing ZBB, you kind of need to think of that cultural shift. Is that what the organization wants to do? It should be a conscious decision, really. And that whole cultural shift is a shift of ownership. If it was your business, would you spend it? That's kind of the key question that comes back to you every time again. And if you want to have sustainable results, so everyone who does ZBB, you can probably get some results in the short term. The more low-hanging fruits or phase spend, or just cut discretionary spend like training, etc. But if you want to have long-term results, I think you can't do some of it. It needs to be kind of a strategic decision to do that. You need to get people along with you, because communication and messaging will be key, because people don't necessarily like it, right? And I think, and Dawn has a couple of points in her presentation around how she managed to get over that lump. And equally, management needs to walk the talk. You cannot force everyone to do a certain activity that saves costs and then not do it yourself. I think you need to balance between the enthusiasm of driving a lot of cost out in a very short term with kind of the longer term strategy. So I think ZBB is not good in itself. It needs to be part of a wider strategy. For example, what will you do with the money that's freed up? Finally, looking forward, I think if you think into the future, I think there's a couple of things to be excited about around ZBB. So it's a very labor-intensive program. So if you can use technology to make it a more continuous process, that would be great. And of course, data gives us so much more options to benchmark and e-source and use predictive analysis, etc. Especially the benchmarking is quite cool, because if you can benchmark with a lot of other organizations, you can really understand where your cost base is versus where it should be. I think the last thing is around visualization, to like Tableau and all these kind of items can give a lot of visibility of costs. So that's it in a nutshell. I think I'd like to invite my colleagues to maybe give some reflections on that.
Tom, thank you so much for sharing your insights with us. It's really important to understand that visibility and standardizations are important. And it's amazing to see how you use this method of two people ownership. It's really clever, and amazing to see also reduction of cost 30%. But obviously, it's not only about cost reduction. I would like to invite our panelists to switch on their cameras and to comment on Tom's presentation, to share your experience, your key takeaways. Dawn, what would be your key takeaways? What you would like to add to Tom's presentation?
I think, thanks, Tom, for sharing that. I think that Tom's got a lot of really great points in his presentation that you can learn from, what they went through and in the different areas. And I think one of them that's really important, and we've talked about it a little bit, and I'll talk about it even more in my presentation, is making this a value-added exercise and process versus cost cutting. So you want to make it positive versus negative. That's what drives the success. That's what will get you more engagement and continued momentum of the process as you, not only when you launch it, but as you continue to do it in the future. The other thing I really like, Tom, that Tom talked about is the cultural shift. Senior leadership need to walk the talk. It cannot just be at a certain level we're going to do this, and it's not all the way through the organization. I think that that's a very important part.
Thank you so much. Larry, what would be your subject matter on this presentation?
Well, first of all, Tom, thank you very much for that presentation. I mean, it was quite clear the level of experience that that you had with it. Really a case of, you've been there, done that, got the T-shirt. So I just thought it was a great presentation. There were a couple of takeaways, like Dawn said, the two owners for each kind of key type of expenditure, that looked pretty key. The other is the need for standardization, right, to help drive visibility, right? That's very important. And then the third, and I think it's probably the most important thing I heard you say, was you really need senior management, not just to kind of buy in, but you really need them to drive it. I mean, finance is going to be doing the legwork. They're going to be doing a lot of the mechanics, hopefully some business partnering, really helping out. But ultimately, this really has to be driven by senior management, because the natural response, I think, is for people to push back and say, I'm not an accountant. I don't need to do this. I know what I'm doing. Just trust me. And you really need senior management to step in and drive it. But it's just a great presentation. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Larry. Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Dawn. Now it's a good timing for us to hear from our practitioners. I would like to launch the first polling question. We really would like to understand whether you started to use ZBB and what is the experience with your ZBB. When you see this polling question, if you can start voting. Do you currently use this in your organization? Yes, we use ZBB. And it has been successful. Yes, we use ZBB and it wasn't successful. No, we do not use ZBB, but plan to deploy this in the future. Or no, we don't use ZBB and there are no plans at all. So please, if you can continue to vote, just a few seconds, please choose only one which is the best description for you. I can see that more than 55% of you voted. Just a few seconds, and I'm closing the poll, and I'm sharing the results right now with everyone. Interesting results, but they are not. They are very typical from those results that we had during our meetings around the globe. So what we see that 19% of you, almost 20% of you, use this really successfully. 6% said that they didn't have very good experience. 41% is planning to deploy this in the future, and 34% never used and do not have any plans to use it. I would like to ask Tom to comment on this.
Hi, Larissa. Thank you. Yeah, I find it quite an interesting one. I was expecting more people to be not successful, so that is really great.
Yes, absolutely. Maybe the reason why it wasn't successful is that because, sometimes it can demotivate people, and sometimes it could be just cutting exercise where people are watching, people are controlled. So there is a lot of resistance when ZBB is implemented this way. Yes, I'm not surprised. I know that traveling around the globe, I would say that more than 50% of people say that they don't have any experience. But then when we look at this, people realize that they have experience with looking at the cost, looking at the P&L items from zero-base. Probably they just didn't call this ZBB. So thank you for your commentary. And Dawn, any commentaries from your side? Any surprises from your side?
No, it's interesting. I think you can try this, and if you're not successful, you can always go back, and I'll talk a little bit about that in my presentation. And but I think that it's interesting that there is a momentum. I think it's the future where that a lot of organizations are not doing this, but they're going to be in the future.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Dawn. Thank you, Tom, and thank you to everyone who shared experience with us. We already discussed some technical and implementation key drivers for ZBB, but let us look at the value creation. So Dawn Laduc, VP FP&A Global Supply Chain, is going to talk to us about her experiences, not only in her current organization, the Natchez Bounty Company, but also from her previous organizations. And Dawn, what is interesting, in all your organizations, it seems to be that you had quite positive experience.
Yeah.
So value creation, reinvestment of this additional value into the company. You are welcome. We are looking forward to hear about your experience.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Next slide, please. So yes, as Larissa talked about, I've been involved in this in multiple different organizations and different roles. And some of the learnings I want to share with you today, a lot of them are consistent, which has been great. I think, when organizations talk about why pursue zero-based budgeting, right? From the experiences that I've had, that, there's three big reasons. There's limited resources. We have, there's always budgets being reduced, and there's a lot of inefficient spending occurring. And sometimes you don't realize it until you really dig into it and see what's out there. Lack of ownership. A lot of the different, in the different organizations I was in, we didn't have clear owners at the line item level on the big ticket line items. There wasn't a lot of visibility in the reporting that was available. Maybe you were underspent in other areas and you were covering up high spends in other areas. So you weren't looking at what was really going on in the details. And so that helped with the, understanding the detailed spend, and then budget owner knowledge transfer, right? A lot of, individuals and organizations move into other roles or leave the organization, and we found that there wasn't a lot of knowledge transfer of, this is what the budget is, here's what we spend and why, and here's things that you might need to cut in the future. That wasn't going on. And third was inaccurate budgets, using averages or trends to develop budgets, and making the budgets very top line. So you weren't seeing, you weren't really understanding what needed to be in those budgets to do to invest like we needed to. Next slide, please. So the next, we looked at, some of the steps I, recommend areas to start with is determine the objective early in your planning process. You don't want to start this as you're starting the budget process at the same time, because you've got to do a lot of education. You need to get the organization ready for this and get that mindset started. You want to partner, so before that, you want to develop the strategy and the timeline. That would be next. And you want to make sure you're really thinking how this folds into the budget forecast, and working with the different areas of the organization, depending on how you're going to roll it out and with who. Partnering and providing resources. Finance, from our perspective, we help do training, similar to for owners that had not had, experience, giving them some finance 101, work sessions with them if needed, and giving them some reference data. What was historical spending, and very specifically what was in there and why, and to help them unravel that, to understand that before they started building their new budget. We also encouraged everyone to link their investment activity to our strategic plan. That's where we're trying to go. Let's make sure that we're putting investment in initiatives that will get us there. And then introduce and educate this to the organization through all of these different areas. It's a culture and a mindset change. It really is, it's not easy, and I think that's a lot of times why it fails. And I think it's just being positive in that, and I think we did a lot of that up front, where the different functions and cross-functional partners we worked with really wanted to partner, and it was a positive experience. Next slide, please. And so some of the key learnings and successes, budget owners now have a detailed understanding of their budgets. They have a vested interest in their spending, and it drives more thoughtful decisions. We reduced a lot of inefficient spend, forgotten commitments. So maybe someone put a contract or a purchase order or just, a commitment out there, and it was still going on, and it needed to maybe stop, prior to, when you're doing this budget, you could have, that we didn't need to do that anymore. We found duplicate spend across the organization. One area of the organization spending on, for example, different consumer insight data, and another cross-functional area, they were also paying for the same subscription. So looking at things like that. And then unnecessary spend. If it's not getting us towards our 3-year plan and it's not getting us where we want to go, we need to really question that spend. We implemented a lot of continuous processes. This is done at every budget cycle. We do monthly spend reviews. We keep the focus out there. We work to drive cross-functional learnings, and we communicate that. So communication is critical. You want to share the wins. You want to show the reinvestment. Show, we wanted to fund this. There was no way we were going to be able to do it. However, because of zero-based budgeting and really assessing our budget in this department, we now can fund that initiative, and it gets us where we need to go. So making it positive, I can't stress that enough, and that's really what we did, and that's what really drove our success. Next slide, please. And so beyond zero-based budgeting, you know, the other area that we have moved into is zero-based FP&A. And so not only thinking about the expense items on the P&L, but also looking in other areas like our balance sheet and in our cash flow processes. And understanding, you know, for example, inventory, instead of taking trends and averages, doing a bottom-up build and really understanding what's in your inventory, what needs to be in there, and what it needs to be in the future. And so that's been very successful. And then in the cash flow, we've same thing, looking at very detailed cash flow budgeting and forecasting, understanding what the big ticket items are and the timing, but at a very detailed level, not just glazing over it at a top line and trending it out as we do the forecast. Next slide, please. And so the 5 key steps that I would recommend that have been very successful, and a lot of them are similar to the learnings and successes that Tom referenced in his presentation, is develop your strategy. What do you want to accomplish, and which areas or functions will participate? Possibly you want to do it in one functional area only to start, or one region, and you can determine that. You can roll it out to the entire organization, but each organization is very different, and you have to figure out what works best for your resources and timing and the ability to change the culture and the mindset. Developing the tools, the process, and the timeline. You know, you want to develop the different reporting and tools, and Larry's going to talk about that in his presentation to give us some more perspective on how to look at reporting and dashboards and bucketing the data. And you want an ongoing process. And then again, communicate to the organization. When you launch it, communicate it, do continuous updates. And then providing the leadership and support. You want to make sure that the finance and any other areas of the organization show the leadership and support. So finance can provide the detail and work sessions to help partner, but senior leadership also needs to walk the talk, as we talked about, and support it. And then communicate. I can't say this enough. Communicate the wins, reinvestment successes. Look at what we were able to do because of this. And share the learnings. Help the other areas of the organization see what you went through or some key learnings that you could share with them. And, you know, and again, I think that, you know, we'll talk more about it in Larry's presentation, and then take the learnings that we had from Tom's. And so now I'd like to invite commentary from my fellow panelists.
Dawn, thank you so much. Excellent presentation, sharing your experience on how to generate value from zero-based budgeting. And also it's wonderful to see that you started already on your first steps on zero-based FP&A, started to use this not only for cost cutting, not only for cost items, but for others. And of course, value creation, this is such an important principle in order for zero-based budgeting, zero-based FP&A to be value-adding. Thank you, Dawn. I would like to invite our panelists to switch on the cameras and to comment on this. Tom, anything you would like to add to this presentation, please?
No, thanks, Dawn. That was really, really insightful. I mean, obviously you have done quite a lot in this space, and I think it's great to see your experiences. I think there's kind of two very interesting points for me personally. One was the emphasis on supporting people through this process, because it is a big change and people don't fully understand their costs necessarily, are not used to fill in many spreadsheets and talking through those in meetings. So I think that's really important. And the second one is to kind of share the wins. If you have X amount of savings, what will the company do with it? Because it takes quite an effort to get there, and then probably we don't spend enough effort then to explain, thanks to X, Y, and Z that you saved, you can now invest in this, which helps the company going forward.
Exactly.
Thank you, Tom. Larry, anything to add from your side?
Again, Dawn, your hands-on experience really shines through the presentation. It was a great presentation. Thank you very much. I think one of the takeaways, just generally, absorbing your presentation, is the amount of planning that you should put into zero-based budgeting before you launch. This is not a let's make a decision on Friday to do zero-based budgeting and start it on Monday.
Exactly.
There's quite a bit of planning, and I wonder with the 6% that didn't implement ZBB successfully, how much of that was due to just not really thinking things through before they got started. But great presentation, thank you.
Thank you.
Larissa, I don't know if we lost you, but if we did, maybe we can launch this this next poll. In your view, what is the biggest benefit of the zero-based budgeting process? So maybe
Larry, thank you so much. I was on mute, you see, so sorry about this. I would say that thank you so much to all of you for commentaries and for great presentation. Now I would like to ask everyone to start voting. Yeah, so please choose one of those which is the best description of your view. In your view, what is the biggest benefit of zero-based budgeting? It removes fat from the budget. It helps with flexible planning process. It helps to fund growth initiatives. It creates the culture of ownership. So please continue to vote. More than 55% of you voted. Thank you so much for this. I'm closing the poll. I'm sharing the results. And I would like to ask Dawn to comment on this. We can see actually that 52% of people think that it creates the culture of ownership. Absolutely. 20% think that it removes fat from the budget, and 16% think that it helps to fund growth initiatives, and 12% think that it helps with flexible planning process. So, Dawn, what would be your commentary?
Thank you, Larissa. I think this is great. I think I'm happy to see that. I like that everyone feels the majority feel that it creates a culture of ownership, because I think that is critical. You want to develop a mentality throughout the organization where the budget owners think and make investment decisions as if it was their own company and their own dollars. And once you get that mindset and that culture, it just continues to grow and build, and then it's there. I think you get the benefit of the other items, but I think the change in the culture of ownership is the most critical.
Excellent. Thank you for your commentary, Dawn. Thank you so much for all your votes, everyone. And now this is a timing for us to look what is happening in the world of technology and how modern technology can enable ZBB, ZB FP&A. What is interesting, when we discuss this at our FP&A boards around the globe, one of the biggest disadvantages that people saw, it's because it's very time consuming. So in every country around the globe, people said that it's very time consuming exercise. We can't do this constantly. And what is interesting that with modern technology, actually, it's not so time consuming anymore. Larry Servan, Regional Director at both International and Thought Leader, is with us. Larry, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Larissa. Next slide, please. So to get started, I think we should take a step back and say, if we're talking about ZBB Enabling Technology, what's really the purpose behind it? What are the objectives? Why would we bring in some enabling technology? So when we've talked to our clients over the years about that topic, here are some of the things that they said. They said that they were really looking for the technology to, of course, help identify savings, right? And that's the general purpose behind ZBB. So the technology should do that. But often, our clients are looking to fund growth initiatives. So it's not just, saving money for the sake of saving money, but it's to invest in the business and really grow it. And Dawn talked a lot about that. Next key objective was to minimize the manual effort involved in the process. And that is the #1 stumbling block for zero-based budgeting. Is it simply takes too long, it's too much of an effort, too much of a manual effort. So our clients really wanted to reduce the manual effort involved in the process so we could really focus on the key decisions need to be made in zero-based budgeting. And something to keep in mind here is if you're looking at zero-based budgeting as a once-off exercise, let's do it once, let's find some savings, and then let's forget about this and go back to what we were doing before. You can do that in Excel. It's going to be very painful. It's going to take a lot of time. It's probably going to upset a lot of people, but it's a once-off. So, maybe you're willing to live with that. But if you're really trying to make this a reproducible model of success, then you really want to reduce the manual effort involved in the process. Another key objective we heard was we really want one version of the truth. So if you're just generating a lot of templates in Excel, emailing those templates around, you are going to lose that one version of the truth very, very quickly, especially if you're going to be running more than one scenario, more than one iteration. So a key goal of the technology is to make sure that you've got one version of the truth. And you never want to hear, oh, that's not my number in a meeting, right? And as Dawn talked about, really driving accountability. So I actually started my career at Pepsi-Cola International, and our CEO used to say, very simply, the people that spend the money should budget the spending. So in some organizations, they sort of push, the finance people or accounting people to the front and say, well, those are the accountants, they really know this budgeting stuff. I'm just, kind of talking to them about it. At Pepsi, no, if you were spending the money, you were accountable for that spending and it was your budget. It wasn't somebody else's budget. But the ultimate goal of the technology is really to help the business leaders in the organization manage the business, make better decisions. Next slide, please. So in terms of the technology enablers, one of the key ones is to really make it easy for people to do zero-based budgeting so they can really focus on their decision making rather than the mechanics of the process. So, one key here is to make it simple, make it easy for people. And actually, I was talking to somebody a couple of weeks ago, and they said kind of the high level mark that they had was, don't make me think. So not just, make it simple, but don't make me think. That was their sort of high water mark. So you really want to present something like what you see on the screen here, which is, it's big button. It doesn't really take more than 2 minutes of training to kind of go through this so that people can really, again, focus on their decision making rather than focusing on the mechanics. The other key, and I'm going to be talking about this as we go through this part of the presentation, is flexibility, because every single organization, number one, has a different code block for their general ledger, different general ledger account, naming conventions, a different way of looking at the business. So in this particular case, this is actually a screenshot from a client. These are the big bucket items that they had, and they actually had a materiality threshold. They didn't do zero-based budgeting on everything. They did it on kind of these key accounts. Your key accounts could be very different. And maybe you don't have just 6 or 7, maybe you've got 12. Maybe you do want to do zero-based budgeting for every account. So flexibility is really key. Next slide, please. So another key here is the whole review process and approval process. And you want an electronic audit trail of who approved what and when. Again, this is key to building accountability, right? You don't want somebody to say, well, I never really approved that number. No, you've got the electronic audit trail. You approved this, on this date at this time for this number. And you want that routing so that once, one person approves the budget, if it needs to go to somebody else, it automatically gets routed. So again, flexibility is key here. So, this is the way, one client wanted to look at their review and approval process. You might have more steps in your process. You might have fewer steps in your process. So again, flexibility is very key here. Next slide, please. So another enabler, and this is really kind of a blocking and tackling thing, is in order to make it easy for people and to standardize. So going back to a comment or an observation that Tom made early on, standardization. And the use of drop-down menus can really be extraordinarily helpful in terms of standardization. So on the upper left-hand side, you'll see that for this particular company, when they were budgeting their spending, they needed to bucket it by strategic initiative. So it was then very easy for the company to say, well, how much are we spending on strategic initiative A versus B versus C? So, and again, that standardization. Flexibility, again, here is very important. You might not even have strategic initiatives. If you do, maybe you've got 3, maybe you've got 30. So that flexibility is very key. And then on the right-hand side, again, some drop-down menus for cost justifications or the driver behind quantities or prices. Again, the more that you can standardize like this, the easier it's going to be to report and really get a grip on things, and the easier you're going to make it for your users. Next slide, please. So another key technology enabler is getting everything in one place, putting everything on one platform. So you're going to run into some friction in the process if you're using one thing for zero-based budgeting, but then you're not going to use that for reporting. You're going to use something else for reporting. You're going to use maybe a third tool for dashboards, maybe a fourth tool for to capture your strategic initiatives. To the extent that you can get everything on one platform, one database, really make it all unified, that's where you really turbocharge zero-based budgeting, because you don't have to go to different systems for different things. It's all in one place, and that's really how you drive the success of zero-based budgeting. Get it all in one place, whether it's your strategic planning, zero-based budgeting, your reporting, get it all in one place. Next slide, please. So to run quickly through this, because I know we're kind of bumping up against the clock, some other considerations. Use your sub-accounts. Think about using your sub-accounts. I've talked to a lot of companies that have sub-accounts and they're not in use. But with zero-based budgeting, it's a great idea to take advantage of those so that you're able to report your actual spending on a closer basis to the way that you're doing your budgeting spending. And that should be your goal, to get your budgeted spending and actual spending on the same foothold so that you're able to do really insightful variance analysis. Training, of course, on the system, but in zero-based budgeting and even the basics of finance. And key here, really elevating the role of the business partner. ZBB really gives finance a chance to really shine in the process. So you can really partner with the departments, with the organizations, with the business units, really help drive value through zero-based budgeting. This is an incredible opportunity for finance to step up their business partner role. And with that, I'll open it up for comments and observations.
Thank you, Larry, for this great presentation on how technology can enhance it. Thank you for this demonstration and examples. I would like to invite panelists to switch on their cameras and to give quick commentaries. Dawn, your 30 seconds commentary, please.
Sure. Larry, thank you for sharing. That was really great information. That one comment that really resonates with me is when you talked about technology can really turbocharge the ZBB process. And I really believe that. I think technology plays a critical role in bucketing the data in a meaningful way to get to meaningful insights. And it becomes one source of truth, and it enables tracking, monitoring, and visibility of the data and the results. And so I think that's really important.
Thank you, Dawn. Tom, what are your points?
Yeah, my point is a bit similar. I mean, I had a practical experience of doing all of this in Excels and having big macros, consolidating Excels across so many different areas. It was one big nightmare. Nights I spent on that. So I think having some kind of technology solution is really important. It doesn't need to be a full ERP. I think in Heinz we used a lot of Excel, but then we had a kind of a SAP BI tool that was fairly quickly and not too expensive to deploy as well. So it could, there's probably a solution out there for any kind of level of company, because some companies have more to invest obviously than others. So I think you need to find something that suits your organization, but you do need to have a system, because just in Excel, you will just have more discussions about numbers being wrong than about kind of the core of what you're trying to achieve.
Thank you so much, Tom. Thank you, Dawn. Thank you, Larry. So this is the timing for us just to draw some conclusions from the meeting, and we will start Q&A session. And I must warn you that we have a lot of questions, very interesting questions, but let me summarize everything. So the main question that people asking, especially those more than half of our participants, and we have more than 850 registrations from 67 countries. So many of them asking question, what are the key steps, practical steps to implement it? I'm sharing with you this 10-step approach as a conclusion from this meeting. But again, it depends on organization. Yeah, so obviously remember your purpose of ZBB, have sponsors, identify your priorities, make your interviews, identify the key drivers that you would like to identify as part of this process, collaborate, make it visible, and think about accountability, monitor the success and adjust when needed, reinvest when needed, automate, and of course, it's one of the ways how you can improve your flexible planning. And you know what, the first question is to all of you, Larry and Dawn and Tom. There are some questions where people ask, budgeting, zero-based budgeting. Budgeting can be flexible. How zero-based budgeting or how zero-based FP&A process can help us with flexibility. And Dawn, I would like to ask you this question, because definitely you already started to implement this in your company. So how it can improve the flexibility in your view?
I think where it really enables you to improve the flexibility is because you have such a detailed understanding of your history and your budget that you've built. And even when you, not only on the expense areas, in that instance, where you could maybe eliminate spending this year on something that we needed, that you wanted to do, but now you can fund something new that just came up. You have a detailed understanding to be able to flex that spending and make quick decisions if needed. I also think on the balance sheet and looking at cash flow, it also enables that. If you understand what's needed in your cash flow at a very detailed level, you can then make cash flow decisions and be flexible if something comes up that you, for example, have a unplanned capital spend, but now you know what else you have that you already have in there, and you can move that around and flex and accommodate the business need as it occurs.
Excellent, Dawn. Thank you so much. From my side, I would like to add that many people think that the reason why it's improved flexibility, because through this negotiation and collaboration, people identify the key drivers, not those historical drivers, but the key ones. Thank you so much, Dawn. The next question is to you, Tom. By having two owners of spend, will that not result in organization being stuck with too many internal meetings and negotiations? Won't you lose agility as the result of this two owners structure? What would be your answer, Tom?
So So I think it's a very good question. And I think inevitably you will have a bit of that. So I think when you implement this, you will go to a kind of adaptation period whereby many budget managers will say, what do you mean I cannot spend it on that? I've always been able to. So I think that's where the culture change comes in, and that's what you will probably go through a bit of a transition period, which may be a bit difficult. The way we kind of manage that is mainly you have a ZBB lead in every business unit who kind of is partially diplomats between the different stakeholders. I think fairly quickly you'll see that everyone understands the rules of the game, and you'll have people kind of proactively going to a package manager saying, look, I have this business case, I need to spend more on that. And I think there is we had quite a fairly flexible way to kind of then adjust certain items. It's definitely something you need to watch out for. I think depending on the organization, you need to think of what do we do if that happens, and if there is a conflict, because ultimately you need a referee.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Tom. The next question is to Larry. Larry, from your experience, how long does it take to implement a good quality ZBB FP&A process with use of modern technology, obviously?
Well, of course, the answer is it depends, right? It depends on how large the organization, how deep you want to go with zero-based budgeting. Are we doing it with every account and every business unit and every department, or are we starting with a particular region? But I'd say, anywhere between 3 to 6 months is probably reasonable to expect for an implementation. And again, it depends on a number of factors. But just a quick comment, I wanted to echo something that Dawn and Tom both mentioned, which is the agility part here is, we had a client that said, we were budgeting for initiatives to help drive improved productivity in our plants, but that required some investment. Well, COVID hit, we had to drop the investment, but we knew precisely what the impact was going to be on productivity, right? So they were able to do straight through processing. So they were very agile, when it came to adjusting for COVID. They knew exactly what the ripple effect was going to be on the P&L, balance sheet, cash flow.
Thank you so much, Larry, and thank you so much, panelists, for answering those questions. And thank you to everyone who asked these questions. There are a lot of questions, and to be honest, it would take another hour for us to answer those. But we promise that we will take all of those into consideration. We will distribute them between our panelists, and we will get back to you through email. So thank you so much, panelists. Thank you, everyone. Just a quick reminder about our upcoming meetings. We continue to share with you the latest trends and developments in those topics. Those are the webinars that we are planning, and the registration process already started. So if you would like to register, the link is in this presentation. Also, before we finish today, I would like to say thank you so much to our partner and sponsor, Both International. Thank you for supporting us. Thank you for making this possible for so many people to join for free, absolutely complimentary for this meeting. And of course, I would like to say thank you so much to all our participants. Thank you for being with us. There are a lot of you from so many countries around the globe. Please stay connected and please send us any information, any insights, or any case studies that you have. And of course, thank you so much, our dear panelists, our international panel of experts. Tom, thank you so much. Dawn, thank you so much. And Larry, thank you so much. So we will start, hopefully we will start to travel, and I hope to see you very soon, at least from the second half of the year. Stay safe. And before we do this, when we finish this webinar, I would like to ask our participants to share the survey questions with us. So please, can you stay for the survey and answer the questions and share your feedback with us. Thank you and see you soon. All the best.
Bye-bye.